In this video, we're going to learn about event caching. Often with event handlers, they run the exact same code no matter how many times they're used and no matter how many users hit that page. For example, our users list page, it produces the same list every single time it's called. Each of those requests runs a database query and the same overhead occurs as the rest of that event is processed. Rather than repeat the same overhead unnecessarily, we can cache the result of our event handlers and Coldbox will simply reuse those for future requests. All you need to do is add several metadata arguments to the action methods and the framework will cache the output of the event in the template cache provider from CacheBox. First, you enable event caching. To do that, you'll need to go into your Coldbox CFC config file and set the Coldbox event caching to true, then reload Coldbox for the changes to take effect. Note that enabling event caching does not mean that all your events will be cached automatically. It just means that this feature is now enabled for you to use. And then you go into each handler and you enable the caching on a handler by handler basis depending on which parts of your application you want to enable caching for. Now, to enable event caching on an event, add the cache equals true metadata to the method signature like we have here on line 49. And also add a cache timeout value so Coldbox knows how long to leave this event in the cache. Pro tip, don't set a cache timeout value of 0. That would leave this event in the cache forever, and it's generally a good practice to let items get refreshed periodically. You can always experiment with different timeout values to get your application running at top performance, but at some point you will want to have your events reloaded. You want to have the cache purged periodically. It's just generally a good practice to do so. So never set cache timeout value to 0. Pick a number that seems to work well for the flow of your system and go with that. All the events and views get cached and are stored in a named cache called template. All Coldbox applications have a template cache by default. You can create new caches and customize how they operate with CacheBox, which is also baked into Coldbox for you automatically. For most of your basic cache functionality, the default template cache should be just fine. If you're really looking to squeeze performance out of a high traffic application and you think the default cache options aren't enough, I'd recommend running some profiling tools on your application first, collecting some metrics, analyzing what's happening, then circle back to see which cache options might be more beneficial to you. But for the most part, you can stick with template cache and you should be just fine. Clearing out the cache and resetting it is also very easy. As I mentioned before, you've got CacheBox baked into your app automatically. CacheBox has a method called clear all events. You can simply get a reference to the cache you want. In this case, we're going to use template cache and call the clear all events method on that object. Poof, you're done. The cache has been reset. Here I'm doing the cache reset in our implicit function prehandler, which we learned about in another video. I've got it set up so I can pass a URL variable in and trigger resetting the cache for anything in this event handler. This might be useful when debugging issues in a handler and you want to make sure that the latest data is being reloaded from the database, things like that. You don't have to put it in as a URL variable. This is just a really easy way to show that you can use it to clear out the caches, and it's similar to what you might do with in a traditional ColdFusion application with the onApplicationStart and onRequestStart methods, where people will often have some sort of URL variable that gets checked in the requestStart method, and if it's visible and set to a certain value, then onRequestStart can trigger onApplicationStart to reload and start the application over again in memory. So we're doing kind of a similar thing here, not for the entire application, but just for resetting the cache for this particular template cache in the event handler. Here's a quick look at all of the machinery happening under the hood in Coldbox when you run a handler action, and we can see the differences when an event is cached and when it's not cached. When a request starts for a handler action, it starts up here, and you can see all of the different steps that happen for pre-processing basically and things that run before the event actually gets kicked off. We have this check here to see if our event has or has not been cached. If it has not been cached, we have all of this extra work that's done here to basically build up and compile the layout of what that event is supposed to output to the browser. We have to take the layout of the actual site, the header footer stuff in your layout CFM file, whatever output is in the view itself. If that view contains other views inside it or other CF include files, anything like that that might produce output for that action has to be processed. Then, once all of that's done, it's handed off to the request end handler inside Coldbox. Any post-processing is done. The request ends and the output from that event is handed out to the browser. If the event is cached, all of that rendering work that we did before has already been done previously because the event was cached. It just grabs it out of the cache and renders it on the screen. So in a high traffic application or an application with really complex views and complex layout structures, turning the caching on really could be a big performance benefit for your application. You can get more information about event caching, including some of the other features you can take advantage of, and that can all be found in the documentation at coalbox.ortusbooks.com.